And we're back now. Michael Duffy, you talk about this exclusive club, people who have been presidents. And I guess one reason they have some empathy for each other is that it is a very lonely job. And really only someone who has done it could possibly know how difficult it is.
There's an almost automatic sympathy between the current president and the men, so far only men, who preceded him. They all study each other's. They have their own rating system. They compare themselves to each other. They read each other's biographies and memoirs carefully. They're looking for lessons. They're looking for sympathy. They're looking for understanding. Nancy once asked George W. Bush, not too long after he'd been in office, do you think differently about Bill Clinton now? And he said, oh, I think differently about all of them. And so they extend to each other, especially after they've done the job for a while, a certain understanding that they don't come into office with about just how hard it is to do this job.
I want to play a little something for you. I think one of the lessons that probably all of us recognize is that I wrote a book once about Ronald Reagan. It came out the month that that George Bush was inaugurated. The book, I think everything in the book is accurate, but it is not entirely true because we didn't know at that time that the Soviet Union was going to fall in. I don't give Reagan total credit for that, but certainly his policies had a part in it. I think you really run a risk when you start trying to judge a presidency too soon. I want to run this. This is what Barack Obama last December told Steve Kroft of 60 Minutes. I want to get your reaction to it.
I would put our legislative and foreign policy accomplishments in our first 2 years against any president, with the possible exceptions of Johnson, FDR, and Lincoln. But you know, just in terms of what we've gotten done in modern history. So as incumbent presidents often do, they give themselves good reviews. Can anyone say, even in the middle of a presidency, this is going to be a successful or an unsuccessful presidency?
No, you really can. You can't say even some years afterwards. There has to be a given time for history to make a judgment. But a good president, I think, has to have a strong sense of who he is and what he's accomplishing, and that indicates that this president certainly does have that.
He does have a good sense of what he was trying to do.
But, you know, in 6 weeks it could look different. If the Supreme Court acts in a certain way on health care, some of those accomplishments that the President was talking about last fall might not be as lengthy. And so time helps. And as there's someone who told me that it's best to wait 5 or 10 years at least before really judging a president in historical terms.
And I think he would drop Lyndon Johnson now. I think when that was said, he thought he had the Obamacare, the huge, you know, health care initiative that put him in that LBJ range, but this will be rule very badly, this president's relationships with Congress. So I don't think he's LBJ-like. He's becoming more Theodore Roosevelt-like, as we saw in his Kansas speech in December, meaning executive orders, myself, and versus Congress 6%. So I think he's now in Harry Truman mode, the know-nothing Congress versus me. So his presidents are shifting somewhat since that was the bite.
You know, I was reminded when you looked at how historians do the measuring, John F. Kennedy was asked by Arthur Schlesinger in the middle of his term to rank the presidents, and he wouldn't do it. He sort of threw it down, and he said, I don't think anyone has any business judging presidents unless they've seen what went across their desks. And they saw that what they were basing their decisions on, a lot of which is not declassified until many years later. And so these judgments in real time are very tricky because, you know, we see through that glass darkly. And so what historians are seeing, and this is why I think what you do is such a smart idea of what voters can see in real time and the critics can see in real time versus what becomes clear from a certain distance.
Robert, what makes a successful presidency? Is there any formula? Do people going into it looking to establish some kind of legacy do any better than those that just deal with the problems that confront them?
The first thing a president has to do to be successful, he has to understand his time. He has to understand what the voters are hungry for, what the electorate wants, what the American people are looking for. And then he's got to try to do that. Now, sometimes that means heroic effort along the lines of what Barack Obama says he accomplished. Sometimes the American people are not looking for that if they're in a satisfied mood. So that's number one. Secondly, I think you've got to pull the levers. You've got to figure out how to get your hands on the levers of power and move the country in the direction that's indicated. And that's not very easy to do.
When we interviewed Bill Clinton for this book, we were in his office in Harlem. He's surrounded by biographies of other presidents. It's almost like a temple of the presidency. And one of the things he started talking about was a president, to be successful, his temperament has to match the times. And I think what he meant by that was he had to be able to read the public, he had to be able to work with his opposition, which, as Clinton always said, was always trying to kill you. And you had to know yourself. You had to know what you could, where your limits were. And he said it was much less about what you accomplished than sort of whether your outlook on life matched that era in which you were governing, which I thought was interesting.
Re-election matters a lot. If Barack Obama gets reelected, he's going to be seen as this incredibly large historic figure. If he loses, it's sort of a referendum that he didn't do well enough, and so it's harder to build yourself up in the polls. The standard of voting for presidents is William Henry Harrison was only president for a month, and he died of pneumonia. You don't want to be rated below William Henry Harrison, and there are a number of presidents that are, and just staying scandal-free, which the Obama administration's largely done, saves you from Warren Harding's fate, where you're in a black hole and you'll never really get out of it. George W. Bush is struggling. He's very, very low because people still don't see that the Iraq War was a good venture and the economy collapsed in 2008 on him.
But Harrison was beloved when he left the presidency.
Yes. after a month.
Doug, I want to just get off presidents just for a minute and talk to you a little bit about your book, because it is a trove of information, not just about the Walter Cronkite and his dealings with the leaders, world leaders, and the influence that he had, but it is also kind of a mini history of broadcast journalism. And one of the things that I found of interest, I knew that Edward R. Murrow, this great figure in broadcast journalism who basically invented how we cover the news, and Walter never really got along. Murrow always looked down a bit on Walter as just being this kind of grubby wire service guy, and Walter kind of understood that's how Murrow felt about him. But what I didn't know is it maybe all started way back there when Ed Murrow was putting together his team, and he offered Walter a job.
Well, that's right. It was wartime London, and Walter Cronkite was doing logging stories for the United Press. And he did a little hit on radio, and it caught Murrow's attention. And suddenly, Walter Cronkite, a dropout from University of Texas, only 2 years, no college degree, Murrow college degree, and Severide and all the great reporters were college people, some even Rhodes Scholars. And Murrow invited him to a gentleman's club in London. And Walter was nervous. And at lunch, Murrow offered him a job to go to Stalingrad and be the CBS News reporter from Russia during World War II. And Walter said yes. And then he went home.
And they shook on it.
They shook on it. Handshake agreement. Cronkite went back to his hotel in London, and suddenly the UP had to tell the bosses there in New York, and they said, "You're not quitting. We'll get you more money." The head of the Unipresser called Cronkite, so he changed his mind, and he reneged on Murrow, and Edward R. Murrow never really forgave him for it. And then also, Edward R. Murrow we think of him going after Joe McCarthy on TV in the 50s, but Murrow didn't believe in live coverage. He demurred on the 52 convention, for example, thinking it would be more of an infomercial where Walter seized the day. So Cronkite became the voice of TV in the 50s while Edward R. Murrow started floundering. And by 1960 Los Angeles Democratic Convention, Cronkite locked the door. They blocked Murrow out of the anchor booth so he wouldn't co-broadcast with him. So they had a great feud, Murrow and Cronkite, that only partially healed. They were two very different men.
Well, I want to thank all of you for being with us this morning. It was really fun to talk to all of you, and congratulations on what you've done here.